Hi, welcome to my super simple ASP.NET web development tutorial. Last time, we took a look at some of the differences and similarities between ASP.NET Web Forms and ASP.NET MVC. We also created a simple Hello World page in both frameworks. In this video, we are going to explore the basic HTML controls in Web Forms and MVC. I've lowered the resolution of my virtual machine and enlarged the font to make it more readable on YouTube. Hopefully I can also improve the sound in the future. Sorry about that. As we learned in the first video, both frameworks output HTML and JavaScript. The controls in Web Forms and MVC correspond to common controls that all browsers understand how to implement. The controls we're going to look at today include the text box control, the text area control, the drop-down list control, the list box control, the radio button control, the checkbox control, the file upload control, and the hidden input control. HTML controls we can cover later include buttons, hyperlinks, images, labels, and form tags. The summary of what we're going to cover today will also be in the video description. All of these controls can be implemented using HTML. You may have seen other controls outside of this list, but these are usually generated with creative use of JavaScript or require you to build them yourself using HTML tags and CSS styles. Let's start with the Web Forms page. Because Web Forms is aimed at rapid application development, Web Forms provides a designer view where you can interact with the controls on the page. Let's take a look. Using the design view, we can drag a text box onto the form. If we switch to the source view, we can see that a text box control has been added to the markup of our page. Let's do that. We'll go to the toolbox window, which I have unpinned, and drag a text box control onto our page. And here's our text box. Let's look at it in the source view. This ASP:"text box is not standard HTML. This is because Web Forms pages are made up of a series of controls. When the web page is ready, these controls will render HTML content that will be sent to the browser. During the loading process, a method in your code behind file called pageLoad will be executed. This is a good time to set up controls and content on your web form. Let's take a look at what gets rendered from the text box control that we placed on the form. As you can see, we've got our hello friendly text that we put earlier on our Hello World page, and a text box that we added to the form. Let's look at the source. So I'm going to right click and view page source. It should be very similar if you're using Internet Explorer, which I plan to switch to in later videos. As we can see, an input tag, which is standard HTML, was output from our ASP:"text box. Aside from the fact that this is a pretty ugly web page, when we go to view the source of this web page, we'll notice that the second text box is completely different HTML. An input tag does not have rows or columns and can only stay on one line. A text area tag can't have the max length attribute, like the text box can. Aside from the fact that this is a pretty ugly web page, when we go to view the source of this web page, we'll notice that the second text box is completely different HTML. An input tag does not have rows or columns and can only stay on one line. A text area tag can't have the max length attribute, like the text box can. Because these are different controls in HTML, which is a limitation of the HTML standard, when I put a max length attribute on the second text box, let's set that to 10, and a max length attribute on the first text box and set that to 10. Let's run this again. This first text box will be limited. I'm typing, but I'm not getting anything more. This text box will not. Again, this is a limitation of the HTML standard. So you need to keep in mind that web forms is rendering HTML, and what HTML the web forms is rendering. There are two ways to populate these controls with input from the website. We can set the initial value in the markup or the design view. Let's take a look at that. Let's stop the project. First, we'll set it in the design view. So I'm going to click on this text box, right click, select properties, and there's a text property. I'm going to type some text. Hit enter, and it shows up on the design view. If we go to the source, we can see that some text has been added to our markup. We can do the same thing right here in the markup ourselves, some other text. And I'm going to remove the max length attributes. And I've put this on multiple lines so that you can see. I'm going to remove the max length attribute from the first text box. So if we were to show this, both text boxes have text in them. You can also do this from the code behind. I'm going to press the F7 hotkey, which takes us to the code behind. The other way to get to the code behind is to select the page we're working on, which is helloworld.aspx, expand it, select the code behind file, double click on it, and here we are. We can refer to the text box controls by their IDs, which are text box 1 and text box 2. I can set the text, some text from page load. And if we execute that, we can see that the text from page load has overridden the text in the markup. This is also important to keep in mind. Now let's add a drop-down list control. I'm going to go back to the hello-world.aspx page and double-click on the ASPX file itself. I'm going to stop the project. Let's remove these other text box controls. I'm going to hit F7, remove the code here that refers to those text box controls because that will no longer work. Save that. Go back to hello-world.aspx. I'm going to add an ASP drop-down list. I'll give an ID of DDL1, drop-down list 1, run at server. A drop-down list renders as a select tag, which has a series of option tags that define what items are available for the user to select. We can add items to the drop-down list in the markup or design view. So let's go ahead and do that, which in this case is an ASP list item. We will give it a text of option 1, value of value 1. I'm going to select that, copy it a few times, change this to option 2, option 3, value 2, value 3. I'm going to save it using Control S and hit the play button. So as we can see here, we've got our drop-down list control with 3 options in it, and if we were to view the page source, we see we have a select tag, 3 option tags and our closing select tag. Let's add list items using the code behind instead of the markup. First, I'll remove the list items that are on our markup. Then I'll press F7 to go to the code behind. Specify DDL1, which is the ID of the drop-down list, dot items dot add. I'll add a new list item. I'll use the handy constructor overload. The first string is our option 1 text. The second string is our value1 value. I'll copy that a few times. Option 2, option 3, value 2, value 3. And then I'll press play. And just like before, we have our select tag with 3 options. This is a good time to talk about WebForms' concept of viewState. ViewState keeps track of the state of the controls on your web form when a postback is made. When WebForms instantiates the controls on your page, it will look at ViewState to populate these controls with values. This is important to remember. Notice how we are adding these items in the page load method. Let's look at that. Here we are with our page load method. Because ViewState keeps track of the items we loaded before, every time we refresh the page, a new set of items will be loaded. I will illustrate this by going to our Hello World ASPX page, adding an ASP button, ID button1, run at server. We'll give it some text. We'll say my button. And this will cause a postback to occur when I press the button. So I'll press the button and notice that we now have 6 options instead of just 3. Later I'll explain what a postback is. But the important thing to remember is that ViewState will exhibit this behavior. To make sure this doesn't happen, I'm going to clear the list of items first. So we'll go back to our Hello World code behind. I'll add a new line here after stopping my project. DDL1.items.clear. I'll hit play. Notice that we have 3 options. I'll click the button and we still have 3 options. Now I'm going to remove the drop-down list from the page. So I'm going to clear out the code in our page load. Go to the Hello World markup. I'm going to remove the button and the drop-down list. And we'll add an ASP list box. ID is going to be LB1, listbox1, run at server. And I'm kind of a fan of short names right now, but you don't have to name your controls like this. And just like before, we can add ASP list items for the options. Text, option 1, value, value 1, copy that a few times. Option 2, option 3, value 2, value 3. Hit play. And notice that we have 3 options in a list box. Just like a drop-down list, we can do the same thing from the code behind. Notice that when I view source, this list box is still a select tag. The only difference is that the size parameter, which is an HTML parameter, has been specified to 4. This is something that WebForms added for us automatically. When it comes to HTML tags, there's no difference between a list box and a drop-down list. They're both the select tag. Notice what happens when we enable multiple selection on our list box. Selection mode equals multiple. Save that. We can now select multiple options in our list box. The markup adds a multiple property with a value of multiple. This is another part of the HTML standard. So again, I'm going to clear the form, and we'll add a radio button control. Notice that I can also drag from the controls toolbox onto the source or the markup. Radio buttons aren't very useful if you have no way to group them. Let's create another radio button control. I just copied and pasted, and WebForms created a radio button 2 ID for me so that they would be unique. And notice that when I select one radio button or the other radio buttons don't get turned off. I can refresh the page, select them in any order, and that's not very useful. WebForms provides a group name attribute, which we can set. So we'll say group 1, group name group 1. I'll save it with Control S. Go back to my web page. Before we do that, let's add some text in front of this radio button. Let me format it so you can see it better. So I'll say option 1. Just add a break, a line break tag, and option 2. Save it, and I'll refresh the page. And now we have our option 1 and option 2, and because they're in the same group, I can pick one or the other. And here is what the HTML that's generated looks like. The name property is the same between these radio buttons, which is again part of the HTML standard. We can set whether these radio buttons are checked both from the markup using the checked property, which is true or false. We can also set it from the code behind. So it's radio button 1 dot checked equals true. We'll notice that when we start the project, that option 1 is selected. The checkbox control is very similar to the radio button control in that it has a checked property, and we can set it in the same way. So let's go back to our Hello World markup page, remove those radio buttons, add an ASP checkbox ID. We'll go for checkbox 1, run at server, and we'll set checked to true. We'll give it some text using the text attribute and specify I accept the terms, which is a pretty common thing to have on a web form. I'll format this so you can see it. Save it. Press play. because I specify that checked is true, the checkbox starts as checked on the page. If we look at the source, we'll notice that it's an input of type checkbox, and the checked attribute is set to checked, which is an HTML standard. The hidden field control is pretty much an invisible text box. You can populate this invisible text box with information that you want provided back to your website when a postback is made, or when data is sent back from the browser to your website. We noticed earlier that web forms stores the view state in a hidden input, which is here. Let's add a hidden input to our page. Which is an ASP:"hidden field." It has an ID of, let's just say hidden field 1, run at server, and we'll specify the value is equal to some hidden information. If I press play, the user will not see this hidden field, but if we were to view source, here it is right here. The next thing we're going to do is add a file upload control to the page. Before we do this, let's take a look at the form tag generated by our web page. Let's view source. All web form pages have a form tag. Usually it is only one form tag, because when you add more than one, it can be difficult to get web forms to behave in the manner you expect. When you add a file upload control to the page, web forms will change the form tag and add some parameters so that the browser knows how to send the data back to the web server in a way that ASP.NET Web Forms can accept it. So notice we have a form tag that has a method attribute, an action attribute, and an ID. Let's go back to our project, stop it. I'll hide this. I'll remove these two controls we already had here, go to my toolbox, get the file upload control, drag that on there. It's got an ID of file upload 1, and let's hit play. And as you can see, a file upload control has indeed been added to the page. I can select a file to upload. But the thing I want you to notice is that if we view source, let's look at our form tag again. Notice that a new attribute has been added, which is encoding type, which has been set to multipart/form data. This has been added so that the browser knows how to send back the data to the web server in a way that ASP.NET Web Forms can accept it. Now we're going to look at how to save this file to disk. There's a lot more to uploading files, but we'll stick with the basics for now. Because refreshing the page will just have the browser ask the website for a fresh copy of the page, we'll need to add a control which will cause a postback. So let's add another button to our page. This time I will call it button 1, run at server. Text for our button is going to be upload the file. I'll save that. We want this file to be uploaded when this button is clicked. This is where the design view comes in handy. Let's right-click on our Upload the File button, select Properties, click the lightning bolt, which is the Events button. We see the click event. I'm going to double-click there, which will create a button 1 click event, which is the default. And inside this event, we're going to check to see if our file upload 1 control has a file. And if it does, we will tell that file upload control to save as this file to C drive slash, here we will look at our projects folder here. I will copy this, put a little @ symbol here so I don't have to escape my slashes in the string, paste that, add another slash, and to that we'll append the file upload1.filename, which is the name of the file when it's passed back from the browser. So if I load the file named image1 on the browser computer, then we want to make sure it's saved as image1 on the server. And that's really all you need to add for code. Notice that in our folder there aren't any files yet. Let's go back to our project. I've already started it. We'll go look at our web page, browse for a file, select one of my slides from earlier, and hit upload the file. The page does a postback, which, because of an HTTP standard, the file control does not retain whatever file was selected. This is something you can't do from any web framework. We'll look in our projects folder, and here's the slide. Next, we'll look at how to add these controls to an MVC view.